Cool. Okay. Hola, ¿cómo estás? Hello, everyone. Mucho gusto. ¿Qué tal? My name is Salvador Cantellano, and thank you for being here. And welcome to my talk on documentary filmmaking, exploring the Pluriverse. And I'm going to talk about my conceptualization of a filmmaking practice that I'm developing as part of my PhD called Cinema del Pueblo. And I'll explain what Pueblo means as I sort of go into it. But it loosely translates to the village cinema. So I'd like to acknowledge that I'm working, living, and raising my family on Kumbamari country on the Yungumbe language region. But I actually live on the borders in between the Minjimbu speaking groups and the Kumbamari speaking groups. And I think this place in which I make work that is in between borders, that where river systems and creeks and water systems that run in our bodies, but also in the physical lands, while they do separate place, they also bring places together and different cultural groups together. And so I really love where I live because it reminds me of my own heritage as well. So I'm what people would refer to as mestizo in Latin America. And that literally translates to mixed blood. So it's an old colonial word, mixing of like Latinos, European and indigenous peoples. But over 500 years, this word mestizo has become a way of just defining like the interconnected culturalness in which we are born into. So I identify as both indigenous and Latino. And I guess my last name Cantellano speaks to an Italian heritage. But there is like indigenousness in my family, and that's, I guess, like part of my struggle is trying to reconnect with all those roots while having been raised as a refugee here in Australia. So I came from Chile at a very young age after the dictatorship, and being raised in Australia, we only speak of Indigenous peoples being Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, and sometimes Islander Pacific people come into this conversation. But during the early 90s, growing up in Australia, that was certainly not the language. And so even in amongst my own family, our indigeneity is still reserved to people who are stereotypically classified as indigenous, like born into indigenous clans. And so my work is about sort of unpacking that and coming to terms with what that means in an academic sense, in an artistic sense, in a personal sense. So I guess I frame my research, Cinema del Pueblo, as a conceptual practice, like as in conceptual arts, that the work itself is about exploring ideas. And essentially, the idea here is that we're doing filmmaking, we're doing documentary filmmaking with the public screening and the film in mind as one process, which is often not typical in the traditional sense of documentary filmmaking. And I should preface that my practice is very much derived from a community engaged space as well as a traditional filmmaking space. So I kind of see myself as a cinematographer in the fine arts sense, but also embedded in community. So I love the best quality that I can get out of a camera, but if those stories aren't placed within meaningful engagements, then I don't believe it's speaking to who I am as an artist. And so it's this constant back and forwards. And I also believe very strongly that because I have these skills and these assets, these tools, these cinema cameras, right? And I have access to high-end film editing equipment that I've collated over decades, why should that only be limited to the scope of like commercial filmmaking? Or why should that only be like a high-end art form? Like, why can't we make community engaged work that is as blue chip as a David Attenborough film? You know, so that's kind of like where I'm sort of coming from. And the work that I want to show today is from a project, so as called Altered Tides. And Altered Tides is partly PhD work and then partly an engagement through the Climate Action Beacon at Griffith University. And it's an initiative through the Climate Action Beacon that was led by Associate Professor Dr. Kerry Foxwell Norton. And it was about engaging with a cultural festival, the Swell Festival in this space by the coast, and with a simple but complicated question. And it's like, how do we engage people into conversations about climate change in ways that work within this cultural scape? And how can we explore Cinema del Pueblo, which I'm so lucky to be able to explore this at a festival, like set in context. How do we make these films with limited budget that can be screened, that in the process of creating community engaged work, we're also thinking about how they're going to be presented, and how do we facilitate dialogue in situ, not only in the film, but in place. And so I'm going to show you a film from the first year, 2023, and then another film from the second year, 2024. And what we sort of developed in the first year was this concept of vignettes, like a short story about somebody's, not about their life, but giving them enough space on screen to share a lived experience. And in the first film, we see this with Uncle Glenn Barry. And then in the second film, we're going to see how that then translates to working with 10 people from communities from the Tweed here through to Hervey Bay up to Magnetic Island, and connection to place.
Sounds amazing, so, Salvador. Have you shared the link in the chat yet?
It should be in the chat, yes.
Okay. And do you want us to continue recording whilst you're playing the film, or would you like us to pause while it's playing?
I think you can continue the recording. I think that'll kind of speak. That'll be a bit more fluent. So I've provided the link for these films for people to watch. I recommend that you watch it on your own computer. While I'll play it and I'll share my screen, it's going to lag, it's going to be slow, but the visual reference on screen will kind of let us know where we're at. The first film runs for about 6 minutes, and we'll have a little chat, and then the next film will run for about 15 minutes, and we'll go from there.
I can't actually see the link coming up. I don't know if that's just my technological incompetence, but
I'll highlight it, maybe.
So it's in the chat from the
Storytelling for Justice. I found the chat really confusing to...
I think it's the main room chat that we don't have subsidiary chats for the breakout rooms, as far as I can see.
Let's see if I can add it again.
Yes, got it now. That's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Okay, cool. All right. So, and I guess like before we watch it, maybe I just want to sort of outline, I don't want to go into too much detail, right? There's so much that I can speak to. No, I'm just going to show the first film, and then we can go from there, I think. So this one's called Two Winks, and it's a vignette with Uncle Glenn Barry. I got to share my screen. Sweet. So does everyone have access to this link in the film? Yeah. Okay, great. I'll play it now.
Yama Yama, Naingu, Marinyalawanga, Naranlee. Our ancestors always watching. Nice space, nice time, nice connection to the country, connection with herself, the world we live in, very separated. I look at Willy Wagtail, Jingery Jingery. I look at Nibbin, the way that birds have two wings working together, a connection with themselves, connection with the air, connection with the environment. I see hints in our birds, our animals, even the flightless Dinawan emu, the way it connects with the ground, the way we look after our animals, the way we look after the land, is how we look after ourselves. Ourselves from Guy Dewey, from heart and soul, how we look after Mother Earth is up to us. Mother Earth is crying at the moment because we're not looking after ourselves. Our mind is at the doorstep trying to push through the next space, but the heart is going, well, we need to work together. Bringing those two spaces is human potential, is spirit in motion, perceiving love everywhere. It's simple, but if you don't know the meaning of the word simple, you miss the hint. Going through a climate of sorts, a climate of seasons. In the West they have the 4 seasons. In many Indigenous First Nation culture we have 7 seasons. More appropriate to connecting with the transitions, the changes. As I say in Central Desert, Yipperinya, caterpillar dreaming, the transformation. There's always that transformation, always that cycle. My hope is using these sensory perceptions that we as human beings have innately. It's how we hear, it's how we see, it's how we know, it's how we feel. And when we miss those opportunities to engage and grow and nurture, we miss the connection with our environment, Gulubar, and we miss the connection with Mal, ourself. And that's the biggest thing I can find from a First Nations point of view, to give myself space in this time, in this bar of the past, of the present, of the future, all same time. My elders say when we're asleep we're awake, when we're awake we're asleep. So if we're sleepwalking, how do I recognise that sleepwalk? How do I recognise my environment that I'm creating with my own mind? And is my heart being mirrored Am I finding my people? Yeah, I will.
Nice. It's always so lovely to just to watch that back. The synchronicity of that day just is just so awe-inspiring. Like, yeah, I don't know if you guys were able to notice, but there was a wiggly wagtail in that film, and it was duetting with Uncle Barry. Like, only he could make that happen, right? Manifest it in this film that was thematically framed around birds with two wings. Like, we went into the film knowing that that's what we wanted to talk about, and Uncle Barry manifested the voice of nature, present, potent. So beautiful. Look, I think I want to speak to kind of the framework that I sort of am starting to develop. But before that is I'll kind of open it up to any kind of discussion, any questions.
I guess one thing I noticed was the emphasis in the film narrative about the self and work on the self, which is something I found really interesting and perhaps a little bit surprising in terms of the focus that you frame. We were talking about climate change and engagement. I think it's something that I've learned today, that the centrality of that issue in a lot of these discussions. So.
I'm glad you raised that point because it's so central to the way we, like the team, right, understands climate change narratives and the way we're trying to decolonize climate change narratives, because we understand from this cultural perspective that numbers aren't going to fix climate change, right? Like, science can only show us so much, and it's really looking inside of us and our connection to the environment in which the paradigm shift really takes place. So yeah, look, and I think I want to speak to that as well, but through the kind of framework of this concept of cinema del pueblo. So the reason why I call this practice, this conceptualization, cinema del pueblo, is because pueblos aren't easily translated. Like, the word pueblo is not easily translated into English. It actually requires a bigger conversation. And it also speaks to my ancestry. So I'm also paying respect to my lived experiences. So pueblos throughout Latin America, Central America, even like North America, are often synonymous with indigenous people and towns. They're often in the English language framed as settlements, but I actually think they're sentiments. And I have this memory growing up in Chile, like during the dictatorship, where I'm sitting on my father's shoulders looking out across a sea of people, like tens of thousands of people protesting at the end of the dictatorship. And in unison, everybody chanting El pueblo unido jamás será vencido, which translates to the people united will never be defeated. And so this speaks to something that English can't capture, that Pueblo is about revolution. It's about change. It's about what we feel for justice, the justice that the futures and the reimaginings that are possible. And so I think the word Pueblo, to bring it into the Australian context and to think about communities, challenges us to reimagine the potential of communities. You know, defining a community as a group of people, I feel, I don't want to say short-sighted, but I think it doesn't capture the potential. The word Pueblo as well, as I understand it, like growing up in Pueblos, it's unspoken. There are unspoken connections when we say Pueblos, and that it's a connection between people, spirituality, and our connection to the environment, to the land, and to culture. So community doesn't capture all of that unless we have a conversation around that in English, right? In Spanish, it's kind of like, it's that unspoken thing. It's kind of like, you know it. But at the same time, I feel like we can learn, like if I was to take this to Chile and to explore this project in Chile, I imagine that I would be challenged with using the word Pueblo, which is good, because then I can take the learnings that I have here from like the indigenous research methodologies and the indigenous concepts of community and connection to place. And I feel like we can then challenge people to understand community and pueblos and mestizaje, like our mixed bloods, like in such a more rich way. So I use this word Pueblo as like this reimagining of place, essentially, and a bigger conversation. And so then Cinema de Pueblo, because we're working with documentary, we're working with cameras, we're working with lenses, like I feel like it's a really nice time to use the lens metaphor and interrogate that further. You know, we often say we're going to, you know, do this project through the lens of justice, right? We're going to do it through the lens of communities. But what does that actually mean? And I feel like I'm in a place to kind of unpack that, because a lens is not this one item. It's actually made of many different lens elements. And when they all come together and refract and bend light and make conscious choices, that's when the image is created. Like an image is something that happens intentionally, and it's political, whether you think about it or not. It's always like as something that we do. Well, not everybody's conscious of it necessarily, but you actively take a picture. So after sort of 3 years of delving into my PhD and around this project, I've come with like 3 main cultural values that underpin the criticality of this work. The first is reciprocity. So the practice is framed by the knowledge that we share through the filmmaking process, and that begins with South-South dialogues. So exchanging our cultures, our shared colonial histories, talking about place and exchanging that knowledge. So while I am able to invite people into the participatory process, into this collaborative filmmaking process, I have to also teach about filmmaking, and people teach me about their place. So it's an exchange. The second value is self-determination, and that is the collective decisions that we make. This process is very much about creating a platform on which people can have control of their story, from script writing through drafting process to delivery. It's about slowing the process down and challenging the hierarchies of traditional documentary filmmaking, where a director or a producer will have a narrative in mind. They will source the people, and usually people in community are framed a certain way. And so this is about flipping it, like kind of knowing that thematically we need to go somewhere with the narrative, but engaging with the people who are going to contribute to the film, asking what kind of stories they want to tell, what is meaningful for them and their community. And that's our starting point. And the third cultural value is stewardship. So that's the responsibility and care that we embody for the environment, particularly around this context, because we're dealing with climate change. But I've also tried this around youth homelessness, and then that responsibility and care looks differently. It's a stewardship for the community. So the storytelling that we're doing because we know that there's going to be a public screening that comes from this project, it's not just the film, we have a responsibility to the people who are going to engage in conversation. And the stories that we share, we're consciously sharing them with our audience in mind. And it's also then stewardship, like a sense of responsibility for the project itself. So through this filmmaking process, like we learn to love the film that we're making, because we're kind of part of it. It's not that we've just been sat down for an interview and catch you later, let's see what happens when the film comes out. No, it's very much about, how can participants feel like they're owning the process as well. And so this takes us into the Pluriverse, right? So the Pluriverse, I came across it. I mean, it has a very long history, but to kind of speed things along, it's about embracing epistemic diversity, celebrating Indigenous and local knowledge systems. I came into it through decolonial design and the work of Arturo Escobar and Walter Mignolo, arguing that design, like filmmaking, like creative practice, like policies, designs, like we must like rethink that the pluriverse world is one that embraces many worlds, and that there are many ways of knowing, and that when we work with community, this means like making knowledge through the knowledge that exists. It's not so much about finding knowledge gaps, it's about integrating and scaffolding the knowledge that exists. So this kind of filmmaking is not about observation. It's not observational documentary. It's more adaptive and a fluid. It's an intentional response that's driven by the participants who are involved in that storytelling process.
It sounds amazing, Salvador. And I remember you saying earlier on you had a 16-minute second clip to show us. And I'm just looking at the time and going, we've got 15 minutes to go.
We got 15 minutes.
Should we watch your film now, or?
Yeah, I think so. I think I'll just leave with like just 5 points of that element of the lens in its metaphorical sense. So lenses are made out of like convex glass pieces, which we can see as the criticality, which magnifies the power structures. They also have concave glass elements, which can expand the field of view. So in ways, this is our relationality to the environment. And how we communicate with our communities. Decoloniality is the lens coating. So every lens has a coat that cuts the glare. And so here we're cutting the glare of colonialism, Western-centric thinking, and human-centric narratives too. So how do we like tell the more than human stories? The focus ring is like the positionality in which what do we foreground and what do we blur in the background? And this is our choice as researchers, as practitioners. And the fifth is pluriversality. So this is kind of like the aperture ring, the iris, like how much light do we let in? How can we challenge singular narratives by exposing the darker areas of language that have often been neglected and marginalized? So with that in mind, I'll play this last piece. If it goes a little bit over, I'll just pause it and we'll have a little bit of time for chat. So this one is like exploring 10 people in this kind of vignetting kind of filmmaking. Okie dokie.
climate change has historically been a scientific question. When I say scientific, I mean climate scientists have been telling us for many decades about what's happening to carbon levels in the atmosphere and how that relates to the greenhouse effect. And it's been probably communicated as a scientific question broadly in how communities are engaged with the issue and how politicians are engaged. And I think science has such a huge role to play. But what we also need to understand is that feelings and conversations, the cultural work of changing minds and hearts is a big part of what we need to do now to respond to climate change. And art is one of our most ancient tools for coming together and sharing stories, sharing knowledge, and sharing science. So I'm really excited about how we can harness creativity, not just art in the sense of a painting in a gallery or those fine art, high art modes that we might be familiar with, but everyday creativity and the idea that everyone is an artist if we know how to look for it. And so a big part of my work is inviting other people to make and share stories while making or through making. And these are ancient practices, and First Nations cultures across the world have been living these practices for time immemorial. But I think many other cultures, our Western culture, has forgotten how to be together like that, to sit in a circle and make and talk, to share knowledge for the growth of communities and to encourage people to care more for places and each other.
Naginda, Nagari, Naya, Naginia by Nai, which means Walgaroo Kappa people welcome you to Yumbanan, Magnetic Island. Through Yumbanan here, we call our sea connection, our sea is called Mada, M-A-D-A, our sea country. In that regard too, we believe the land and the sea together, they're joined at the hip. They have to be for both of them to survive. It comes out of Mother Earth. It connects us all. And, if we take too much of this or that, we're destroying that connection that holds everything together. Everything here is connected. You cut down something, it's going to affect something else. You've got the reef there, you've got your seagrass, and you've got your mangrove. They all rely on each other. You take one out of the equation, and then something's going to happen.
The Great Barrier Reef is not just one thing, right? It's many things all at the same time. We think of the reef as the Great Barrier Reef, this icon, this single thing that's suffering from climate change. But in reality, it's hundreds of reefs across thousands of kilometres with different communities, different species, different ecosystems, different stories. And what's happened in the last few years and the way the media, the way scientists, the way politicians have talked about the reef is as if it's one thing. And I think some of the problem with the way we talk about climate change is we forget this nuance and it has to be black or white. There's one solution or the other, when in reality there's lots of little things. And I think bringing in some of that complexity, some of that nuance into the story of climate change and the reef is critical in how we move forward.
The ocean is my favourite place to be. Being underwater on a coral reef, floating weightless amongst all the vibrant colours and shapes and patterns and noises of life down there in the ocean, that's when I feel most connected to the earth and calmest.
I couldn't imagine a life without the ocean. Since I was really young, I just have this fond memory of just exploring the rough pools at the beaches I grew up, and I always had this sense of what's out there, and I had this allure and calling to the ocean, particularly for the benthic organisms like octopus, cuttlefish, squid, the cephalopods. They were really my launch pad into getting out there and exploring the ocean and seeing what mysteries lie there waiting for us to experience and discover.
Never identified as a nature person. Never felt like there was a place I really belonged or was at home until I went to live and work on the reef. And it was the place and the people that I was like, oh, this is special, this is different, this is where I feel connected to the earth. And for the longest time, I still thought that doesn't make me a nature person because nature's not blue, it's green, which is a weird thought to have, but I've come around to be like, it's okay to find home underwater.
When I first think of home, I think of love and safety, and that's what I was raised with. I feel very much connected. I feel very empowered and loved by my area, by my community, by my ocean. It's just home.
To me, like, the reef is like home. When I'm out there, it feels like that's just where I belong, and it feels amazing.
When you know corals and coral reefs, you have a relationship with them. You care about them. I know the names of hundreds of different coral species. So when I go diving underwater, I see my old coral friends. I recognise them and I greet them by name. And I know their personalities. Some of them are cute and delicate, some of them are rough and robust, some of them are fast and weedy. It's a joyful personal reunion every time I head back underwater and I see my old coral friends. I have this relationship with them and I care about them. And so it hurts me when I see corals sick or injured or dying, just like it hurts me to see a friend sick or injured or dying.
Might just pause it there. I think I might pause it on the struggle because I guess, like, in the idea of justice, like, while these films are beautiful, it is about change and it is about the paradigm shift. So I'll kind of remind us in that moment that our coral friends are struggling, our waters are warming. And I'll open it up in the last sort of few minutes that we have for any kind of chats. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Salvador, for wonderful glimpses of your work, and looking forward to seeing the whole thing, and also for such an insightful unpacking of that metaphor of the lens. Really given me a lot to think about, and also your notion of Pueblo, very interesting concept I was completely unaware of. Folks, got comments, suggestions, questions for Salvador? Can use the chat box if you like. We've got, I think, 3 minutes or something like that. So
Sorry, I spoke too long.
No, you didn't. What you said was amazing. It was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. And I think everyone's probably getting a bit sort of zoomed out to be interactive by this time of the day. So I think you've done really well with the time available to you. But does anyone got burning issues they want to raise or present to Salvador? I think we're all sitting here looking forward to seeing the remaining 8 minutes of that clip and engaging with that incredible discussions that we heard from the contributors.
Thank you. Yeah, I know. I'm missing that coffee that I didn't make.
I think we're all more or less in that one there.
And look, and these films are meant to be meditative, right? They are made for a public space in which that they kind of unpack slowly enough to kind of change our brain waves. Not that I haven't done any research in my PhD about this, but I think instinctually or intuitively, like I know that that's what's happening. Like we're getting put into a meditative state to allow us to absorb that information.
I've read some, as I did a special issue of the journal Continuum a couple of years ago with a colleague, Ian Collinson, and there's a piece in that collection which is about scientific cinema of the underwater space, which is also talking about slow cinema in the same, I mean, it's coming from very different reference points, but maybe intersecting a little bit with that idea of a meditative engagement with space, which I feel has come out really strongly from all of the panels today, that idea of making time to listen and giving space to looking after yourself as well as engaging with relationally. So yeah, really interesting. I'm aware it's just gone 1:45. So can we say a big thank you to Salvador for his wonderful ideas and work, and excited to hop over and listen to the next panel on my old friend, the wonderful Professor Mary Corcoran has got up very early to do a talk, so I'm looking forward to that. Thanks so much, Salvador, and look
Thanks
forward.
so much, everyone.
Take care.
Thanks, Salvador.
Thank
Awesome.
you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Absolutely our pleasure.
Cool. I'll stay. I'll go to the next one.